and thanks for joining me for about a half an hour. I have a lot of material here, and so what I'm going to try and do is hit the highlights. First, let me just explain who I am and the point of view that I'm bringing. I mean, I'm a part-time professor. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania, both Wharton and at the School of Arts and Sciences in the Environmental Studies master's programs. And then I also teach at NYU. My perspective that I come from is operations management and supply chain management, and all my work has to do with energy and it's pretty heavily in batteries, but also every kind of energy, oil, gas, power, and energy storage whole thing. So these are the topics that I typically cover in my classes, and I've written a few books, some of which are germane. One of them is Reinventing the Energy Value Chain, which spends a bit of time on energy storage, and some others. This one here, Trump, Trade, and the End of Globalization, talks about trade policies of the United States, like tariffs, which we're going to talk about today. And then oil, gas, and power gen also could involve. And this one here is about net zero, how to get to net zero for companies. So that's my perspective and where I'm coming from. Also have clients through business with Boston Strategies International, which is a company I founded. And our clients tend to be, OEMs and equipment providers and transportation companies, that sort of, and power and companies as well. And we do business strategies. That's kind of where we're coming from. What I'm going to be doing is talking about little bit of a preview or a review, maybe, if you're familiar with the local value chain efforts worldwide, what's going on. And I think you might be surprised at really the extent of local value chain efforts. We're all pretty familiar. We hear in the news the different individual day-by-day kind of programs, and some of the big ones like the IRA in the United States and the Industrial Acceleration Program in Europe. But there's more to it. And so I just want to give you a picture of that. And then I want to kind of take and step back and look at have these local value chain initiatives actually borne fruit? Have they succeeded or failed so far? Many of them are young, but a question comes up, okay, we've made a big policy shift. Do we see a reaction, a response in the trade flows or not? So we're going to answer that question. And then based on that, we'll again ask the question, how much of the battery value chain could be localized within our lifetimes, let's say the next 5 years, which is probably the lifetime of a company as far as financial results go. You've got to come up with some kind of a payback that pleases the venture capitalists or the private equity guys behind the company. And is this really going to work, and how much can it be localized? And then I'm going to throw out some ideas for local battery value chain scenarios, because at the end of the day, we're going to see it going one way or another way. There's got to be an axis of competition, and there's got to be a winner and a loser. And so I'm going to lay out a couple scenarios that we can talk about. So first, I want to just start looking at local battery value chain efforts in some detail, just to give you a frame for where we've been and where we're going. There have been major efforts to develop local battery value chains across the world, not only in the USA and Europe, but also in China. And I'll start with China because it's a little less clear. China actually has a lot of policies that are indirectly related to promoting local battery value chains. They relate to, in some cases, regulating and managing capacity and demand, and therefore prices, and so an industry structure. So by this anti-involution policy, they are controlling capacity and therefore price, and they kind of make the policy decision to consolidate the industry or not. And then that has impact on economies of scale, which has impact on marginal cost and of production. So the policy is in this case, not a specific battery policy, but it has major implications for batteries. There's also safety standards and other standards. They're not even called standards actually in China, but they're sort of equivalent of EU directives, I'd say, in their impact. And they set pretty high technical bars for chemistries and quality, which is important because in the end of the day, that stimulates innovation and competition. And it also creates a funding mechanism for innovation. And there's also tax exemptions for electric vehicle buyers and other types of technology purchases, just like we have. And they have a big impact when you have such a large population. And there's also the export control quotas we've all heard about rare earth minerals, but also battery materials. And through those mechanisms, they're actually able to put forth a pretty robust and consistent battery value chain policy, which doesn't sound like one, but it is. The US is, well, let's take Europe next. I'm going to go from right to left. Let's pretend we're in Japan or the Middle East here. So going to Europe, there is a whole plethora of battery directives and battery consortia and battery alliances and innovation funds and things like that. So probably everybody on this call is familiar with the Critical Raw Materials Act. And it's pretty stringent, so it's hard to actually get set up without local presence and local partner. And the European Battery Alliance is pretty significant in terms of its collaboration and communication and impact. Other research and innovation agendas and the batteries regulation, battery passport, which mandates digital records all the way from one end to the other of life. And I don't think it's on here, but the Industrial Acceleration Program, which is new, also is applying to batteries. So lots of programs there. The US is very schizophrenic when it comes to batteries. I mean, we were all over it in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some parts of that still exist. What's not on here was I'll talk about it more, was not the Irish Republican Army, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And that actually had a major impact, but now that's been largely rolled back. But there still are advanced manufacturing production credit. So at the extent that if you do it right, or if you do it in a way that advances manufacturing, you can actually effectively get battery subsidies under Section 45X, but you have to do it in a certain way. There's also regulations concerning foreign entity of concern, which effectively disqualify Chinese and certain other countries from the battery value chain, which has been an important regulatory move toward local value chains. And then there's all sorts of actions, executive actions and other actions coming out of the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. And they decide who they're going to fund and not fund, including small businesses and including large businesses. So no matter where you are, there's a lot of policies in every part of the world that are aimed toward creating local battery value chains. And this has been going on for a while now. Historical perspective, the Inflation Reduction Act did actually create, just simplify the chart, roughly 30% subsidies through tax incentives for any kind of renewables. This was in the Biden era. A lot of that went to wind, carbon capture and sequestration, and energy storage. And in energy storage, we were really looking at battery energy storage systems for stationary as well as power, motive power, and a lot of that was geared toward EVs. It was huge, and it resulted in about $300 billion toward electric vehicles and manufacturing infrastructure. This was then reversed, largely reversed, gutted, they say. The EV credit was fully repealed by September 30th. The commercial EVs and chargers as well, and the credits for other commercial credits were killed. So you used to have like $7,500 per vehicle, etc., 30% for the chargers, and now most of that has been repealed. And then that has slowed down EV adoption, of course. So we have a kind of a shift in the curve. The is the policy for stationary clean power has also been shifted a lot. Uh, there used to be residential solar and geothermal credits, all sorts of efficiency credits, ending, expiring, etc. So effectively, a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act was reversed and even canceled. Actually, a lot of companies that had gotten funding or gotten commitments to fund were then revoked. So and of course, the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and other climate funding issues. So what happened in this case was the U.S. renewables investment dropped $19 billion, which is a lot. And these graphs show the actual trends of before and after the big beautiful bill, which was the sort of the reversion or the revisionist Trump policy, which took over from Biden policies. And you can see the red line is the blue line is what happened was a trend line before let's say during the Biden administration, and the red line is the trend after the Trump administration came in, and you see this huge gap here, which is shaded in gray, which represents the amount of investment that declined into these renewable energy segments. We're here talking about batteries, so obviously utility scale energy storage has been a substantial decline, and residential scale energy storage has been as well a big shift. EVs are not on here, but EVs are pretty much um, independent now, and as we'll see, their demand has dropped. In the EU and the UK, we have a lot of different regulations, roadmaps, and mandates and directives and everything. So we've identified 15 regulations and 4 major roadmaps that apply to this. I've listed a few here just to focus on some of them at the very top: the European Green Deal, Repowering, EU New Batteries Regulation. There's annexes to different um, environmental regulations, etc. So obviously the new batteries regulation from 2023. Some of these have there's been pressure on them to change and to slow them, etc. But this has been the situation. In China, you also have a lot of battery guidelines. In this case, we counted 26. Mainland China, what they call power battery industry guidelines. There are an equivalent number for motive power, uh, and uh, and this basically we started listing a few of them here just to kind of give you a sense for it. And they don't have names like the battery law, right? The names are like implementation opinions on manufacturing reliability improvement, which you would not think is a battery regulation, but actually, if you look at it in its application, it actually applies very significantly to the battery industry. There's another one on optimizing vehicle purchase tax reduction or for new energy vehicles. These kinds of things have very benign and even dull sounding names, but actually they have very significant impact on the battery industry. So if you filter all that down, we're basically looking at some that have directly relevant, explicit um, implications for battery industry. So, so I think I've kind of made the point that there's a lot of activity in regulations, mandates, incentives, and barriers that's being played out. So now the question after you see that is it working? And so that's a question I thought I'd try to tackle, right? Is any of this actually working? And the reason I asked that question is because as I sort of said in my preview, there are huge stakes here. And much as one might want for it to work, it's not evident or it's not apparent that the logic would say that this is going to work. So let's look at the impact that some of this actually has. If you look at the import reliance for battery materials and batteries in general, so we'll call it the whole battery ecosystem, and you look at the United States and where we were and where we are. So the U.S. was basically in this is 2000. It starts in 2000, was like almost entirely dependent on imports for most battery things. And by 2010, that hadn't changed much. And now between 2010 and 2026, you see a big impact on reduced dependence. But you see that also in Europe. So Europe was almost similarly dependent for battery materials and battery components. And then it also dropped, but not, it actually dropped more by 2010, but now less by 2026, 2025 in this case. So you do see a reduction in dependence on foreign. The China numbers are kind of meaningless because China has had, well, it's dropped to almost zero dependence, let's say 4% dependence on foreign, which means they can make 96% of the batteries they need uh, in the country. So you kind of see the picture here that the US and the EU are on a pathway toward independence, but it's a marathon. It's not a 100 yard sprint. So if you take the rate of change per year here and you extrapolate it, as much as that's an impressive reduction, to get to somewhere where China is, it could take 60 or 100 more years. I mean, just think about it, because this is a 30-year period here, 25-year period, right? So if you keep on doing that and you get reductions, it's going to take a long time. So I think the question really comes up, are we able to get there, and what strategies can we take to actually make this all these policies achieve below 50% dependence, and then probably below 25% dependence if you're going to try to be an aggressive competitor on the world scale without continuing ongoing protectionism. Continuing ongoing protectionism is basically a situation that I don't think anybody wants to be in. China has a large enough domestic market to support that. I guess it could be argued that the United States has enough of a market, and the EU combined collectively have enough of a market to be ongoing supportive of protectionism. But from a public management of coffers standpoint, if you're going to continually incentivize and policy activate a transition, you've got to get the money from somewhere to put it into this policy. So where is the money going to come from? Let's look at the near-term effect. The U.S. Tariffs have been in effect over the last few years, have had a major tariffs applying to China that have come from multiple sources. They've been what they call the IEEPA tariffs, which were then ruled illegal by the Supreme Court, and then but Trump found a way around it to apply a 10% overall. That gets added to an ad valorem tax. The original tax was already 3.7% for goods coming from China. Then you add the 10 to 150%, and then you back off 100%, which you gave away, and now we're buying time. So still it's around 15 to, it's still around 40 to 50% actually for most battery products at the current time. So the impact here, if you see these two bars, this one shows the EV sales, which rose and rose and rose and then declined a little bit. This one shows the battery sales from the world total imports, battery imports. So the battery imports are tracking pretty closely to the EV sales, and but this decline here could be due to the tariffs, as well as a bunch of other fossil fuel policies. So I'm not sure that you could say that's definitely a successful tariff policy. If you were to remove all the other policies around fossil fuel stimulus, not sure that would decline. I'm not sure you can relate or correlate the tariffs to the decrease in import dependence for the United States. If you look at the companies that were supported during the IRA period, you actually have 2/3 of those are growing, 1/3 are shrinking or closed. So the change in policy has created a mixed environment. Some of them are growing, some of them are not. And frankly, the money that is available is going more toward nuclear and other energy sources. So geothermal and oil and gas. So there's kind of a mixed picture right now. The EU shows, as you have raised in the previous session, an increase. It's actually a continuing increase, but slower. Um, and the imports as well have risen, and so you end up kind of looking at the margin of what is the difference between the growth and the imports. And China is on an upward trajectory continuously, and imports are also up. But you see that this is as a separate bar for China. I don't know why China is on here, but that's where most of it is coming from. So if you actually look at non-China countries, they're down here, which means that the anti-involution policy might actually be succeeding over a 10-year period. So two of the countries that have really gained from this trade repositioning are South Korea and Japan, while U.S. imports from China dropped by $4 billion. Trade with South Korea and Japan has increased. Some people are quick to point out that that's transshipment and kind of a lot of Chinese goods that have made it through either South Korea or Japan and are being rebranded. Some people say that, okay, but it has a big impact on the trade flows and also our relations. So, okay, so some of the regulations and some of the directives have had an impact. I think we can see a decline in import dependence on at both the EU level and the US level, probably in conjunction with a lot of other energy policies. It's had an impact. So the question is, how much of the battery value chain can we localize within a window of opportunity timeframe? So, and here where we look at, well, how much of a price gap do we have to cover if we look at price? Canada here, China here, you're looking at a 4-to-1, 3 to 4 to 1 ratio. A third, or China is a third, or China is a quarter of some of those other prices that we see here. So we're trying to ratchet, if it's Canada, the US is not on here, but we're trying to ratchet these down to that level if you're going to compete on cost. Is that realistic? I think we don't really have a way to get there right now, honestly. So how do you compete if you're going to continue these policies? And one way, if you go back and remember who Michael Porter was, he's a Harvard Business School professor, wrote a very famous series of books in the 1980s and 90s on corporate strategy. One was called Competitive Strategy, and it laid out a theory that all companies have only three axes of competition. One is by competing on cost, low cost, which we just said probably is not going to work. The second one is to compete on differentiation, which I teach in my courses, can be done through customization, innovation, fast delivery or flexible delivery. And the third one is to focus on a specific market segment and become the king or queen of serving that particular segment. And so there could be an opportunity here, both for EU and the US, to achieve these differentiation possibilities, especially for 95+% dependent minerals, some of which are battery inputs as well, and to focus perhaps on specific technology applications within the others for some 75 to 95% dependent minerals, so we could actually start producing in the US. The important thing here is that cost leadership is probably not, I mean, we could try to go the gigafactory approach, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. That's going to be very difficult to actually achieve a sustainably competitive low cost that would compete at the level that China can make. So when it comes to innovation, how do we do that? We do have in the US and in Europe a lot of innovation and research and development projects. Some of them engage national labs, universities, and corporate labs. And we study this kind of stuff all the time through Boston Strategies for clients. And we've worked on this for the Department of Energy, for example, and other minerals and materials companies, looking at the chemistries and how new chemistries can either result in substituting products or in enhancing the performance of certain metals and other alloys. There's a lot going on here, and we've done it for the DOE, and there could be basically ways to to achieve innovation and focus through as I showed that chart, differentiation through innovation and focus. Private sector does it too. We're helping a battery client commercialize its technology based on a 35% fleet life cycle cost advantage for this kind of equipment. So that's what I mean by differentiation, or in this case, it's focus and differentiation because the target market is so specific. All of that put together, what could we get to? By 2030, because that's the next 5 years we're talking, 4 to 5 years. We're kind of looking at it thinking that you could get to about 50% local content. But keep in mind that a lot of that is probably coming from companies in countries in Asia. So it's not necessarily all American or capital, and it's not necessarily all American equity. It would involve a substantial amount of foreign direct investment, which is maybe a good thing. And with that, then we could actually fill the gap and get up to about 50% local content by 2030 with strong policy action and also with a lot of foreign direct investment. And I think that's basically where a lot of the Trump trade policy negotiations have been going. This chart is thanks to our partner in Paris, who we work with a lot, Strat Anticipation, and you can get that. I'd be happy to share the deck with those people who want this. Just email me or contact me, and I'll send it to you. EU has a little bit of a further uphill climb because of the cost structures right now. Korea will pick up a larger share of the imports that were previously held from China. Some of that may be transshipments. Similarly, there's another set of actors in Europe, some of which are American also, but mostly European, who can help the EU get to about half or less by 2030. That's by 2035. So moving a little slower. So China, on the other hand, don't forget, is still increasing capacity and production. So I mean, maybe not this year, but between now and 2030, we do see, this is from the Volta battery report, actually, shows China projected to increase battery production very substantially between 2026, which is here, the 4 to the 7150. So that's almost the double. So where does that leave us for scenarios? And here's where I'd like to maybe open it up to questions and answers, other than to say that you've got a couple different scenario options for each trading block. One is to give up and just say, we cannot compete on this, right? And I don't treat that lightly. Of course, nobody's going to do that. But I think that if you look at it rationally, you have to consider what's investable and bankable and what isn't. So giving up, I think, is something that has to be a scenario somewhere. It's your BATNA. If in negotiation techniques, there's always a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What happens if you can't achieve the others in a competitively winning way? You're better off giving up than trying to compete on something that you can't. We won't go there. Go back to fossil fuels. That's certainly a big part of the trade policy here. Build an innovation edge. That's certainly very, very important. And then scale through national champions is also looks like it's emerging as a possibility. In Europe, we have a gigafactory kind of options. There's a big tendency now to unite and build large. You also have a possibility to delay the fossil fuel mandates, a lot of the 2030, 2050 net zero kind of things, and to pivot to other mining areas for value chain development, which may be an option as well. And of course, the national champion thing could come up as well, and you may actually have some linkages between different strategies here between the US and the EU. You could also have economies of scale and innovation. Maybe there's some coordination there. And then on China, China will probably, one of the things that I think we may not be paying attention to is that China may decided to harvest the battery industry and move on to some other industries. There's a lot of industrial planning going on in China right now. Batteries may be last year's news for China, as much as it sounds crass, this may not be the most important thing on their mind for the next 15 to 20 years. So that might be a possibility. They also have a lot of innovation edges on advanced technologies in batteries, as everybody knows. And they also have an opportunity to just continue leveraging that enormous scale that's been built so far. They also could ally with the U.S. There could be some sort of uh, collaboration or foreign direct investment. And if you look at the way the United States trade negotiations have gone, there's been most of the publicity the has been around the tariffs, but actually the tariffs are kind of a foil, in my opinion. What's going on underneath those is a lot of foreign direct investment and joint venture kind of discussions and how we can pull a lot of money from, for example, Japan into the United States. And China into the United States might actually come up during even today's session that's going on right now between Xi and Trump. So, I mean, these are kind of pie in the sky scenarios, but I think that all of anybody who's an active player in this business should be mapping out scenarios and looking at windows of opportunity, because windows open and windows close. So we did this for one of our clients not too long ago. When will the window open for a technology? When will it close? And we were actually exactly on, because the window opened, the window closed. And what we originally looked at is no longer really a competitive option technologically. So all these scenarios have a expiration date on them. And I think that with that, the rest goes to discussion, and I'll probably leave it to have to close out to the time. If there's some questions and answers and there's enough time, I'd be happy to take them. But I don't know if anybody's moderating. I suspect they're going to probably cut our session soon. So I'll say thank you and shut up, and I'll leave you to think about that. Here's my contact information if you want the slide deck or if you want to talk about anything in there. So right now, I'll just throw it open to Q&A until they cut us off. Thank you.